Hey everyone, I know it's been a while, and it's time for another video. Um, in this one, I want to show you that I finally implemented Activity Pane. A little bit of backstory on why it's embarrassingly taken this long to implement Activity Pane in Cortex, um, but more on that in a bit. Before I get to that, I want to remind everyone that every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, I host the Cortex users group. This is an opportunity for anyone who's using Cortex, thinking about using Cortex, uh, or wanting to talk about Cortex or Cherwell, lamenting the sunsetting of Cherwell, to come and talk to other like-minded individuals, ask questions of me, ask questions of your peers, of the community. Um, I want to build back the community that existed around Cherwell as much as possible. And as Cortex gets more and more involved and they're more and more sophisticated, there's more to do in Cortex. I think there will be more and more to talk about. Um, Definitely in the next few, there will be sneak previews on kind of what's coming next for Cortex. We're coming up on about a year of development uh, in Cortex. It's very close to a year from when Avanti announced that Cherwell was going end of life. Um, it was Halloween of 2023. Um, and I think the next week is when I started developing Cortex. May have even been that week. I think the first official commit was the a week later, but I might have started tinkering, the day after. So it's almost a year that I've been working on Cortex. And so I've started to think about, okay, so what's next? Obviously, I want to continue to allow you all to get access to your data. But eventually I want Cortex to be something more. And so I'll be showing off and bouncing some ideas off of people. I've already talked to some of you about kind of what I'm thinking, actually a few different iterations of what I've been thinking. But I've settled on an idea that I think is going to be pretty valuable. And I'm going to start testing it out in small groups in the Cortex users group. So if you want some input on the direction of Cortex, have some ideas, want to be part of that sounding board, come to the Cortex users group. Again, every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time. There's links down in the video description to get an invite to that. With that, I've talked enough about that. Let's talk about Activity Pane. Um, so why has it taken me so long to get to Activity Pane? Um, well, realistically, most of the people that I've been talking to so far have just had older databases that weren't using Activity Pane. So even though I started using Cortex or started building Cortex on relatively recent demos I think it was 2023.1 at the time, um, which obviously did have Activity Pane configured. Most of the customer databases that I was working with, most of your databases, came from the 8 dot something days or the 9 dot something days before Activity Pane was implemented or became part of most databases. But one way or another, it was going to happen. I came across a database that heavily used Activity Pane, so now I get to demo that Activity Pane works. So let's go over to browse because we haven't been there in a while. Uh, and let's look at change request and let's just drill into a change request. And once that loads, we'll see that amongst the tabs, in addition to the overview form and all of the other relationships, we have the activity tab, which just like all the other tabs, the name is driven by um, the expressions. It's just a tab. In most systems, I think it's just activity. And it looks like this particular change has no activity. So that's not a very good example, is it? Let's go over to incident, and incidents tend to have activity. So let's look at this one, and we can see a whole bunch of activity. Um, Now, what are the kind of weird things in Cherwell with the activity pane is that none of this was really customizable in the same way that forms were. I'm pretty sure there were basically four sections. There's a title, a created by and at, the body, and a modification line. So basically, like four lines of text, each one formatted slightly differently, but basically concatenated into like an HTML page. Um, and it was always those four pieces. And it's actually six, I think seven if you count whether or not the activity was pinned. Um, and those were handled uh, basically by attributes. It's not actually an attribute in the you don't go to the attributes section of your business object to configure that. Um, but you would map a particular field to be a particular activity field, more or less. Um, and that meant that it showed up in that spot on this page. Um, so it was a little bit interesting to implement, but it's all there. Um, in this case, I think it's all the audit stuff. So it shows up on system audits, but external communications, internal notes, and pinned. I don't have anything pinned. If you had something pinned, that would show up as pinned. Um, yeah, it's either blank, pinned is also blank, but all these system audits are there. Now, I will say there is one way that I deviated from how Cherwell works when I was implementing this. And I'll show you that right now. So here we have the change business object. I'm using change because in the out of the box content, it was specifically configured to be what I would consider a weird way. Incident doesn't have this behavior, but change does in the out of the box content. Um, and specifically, what I'm talking about is you'll notice that on each of these three tabs, there is a group member that is um, basically the same group member appears on all three tabs. So even though each of these eight types of history gets sorted to these three tabs, so you get three here, four here, and one here, that adds up to eight, and those are hard coded in Cherwell. You cannot change those. I looked, I tried, it doesn't work that way, um, as far as I know. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments. But I believe that these three items, these four items, and that one item always shows up on those three tabs in that specific way. However, you'll notice that chat history is mapped to journal note. And over here, chat history is journal note. System audits, lifecycle history is also mapped to journal note. So lifecycle history, journal note. Yep, that checks out. Internal notes, manual history is mapped to journal note. Manual history, journal note. That means journal note appears on all three tabs. Now, initially, I started going through the defs, I started going through the records to try to figure out if there was a way to determine which journal note should appear on which tabs. It doesn't work that way. Journal note will appear on all three tabs simply because it is mapped to something on all three of these tabs. It is mapped to manual history, lifecycle history, and chat history, which show up on all three tabs. Now, the way this looks in Cherwell is like this. So here's a note, here's a change, here's a note that I created using this create note button. So I know it's a note. I created it as a note. It also shows up on external communications. It also shows up on system audits. And if you look at the timestamps, created and last modified are basically the same, 9:51 and 0 seconds, 9:51 and 1 second. They are the same. They are the exact same record. Now, if I go over to all, we see three of them, which to me just feels weird, um, because it's the same record. I don't need to know that it's a note and it appears on all three uh, tabs, once as a communication, once as an audit, and once as a note. That just that doesn't seem really right to me. It's a note. It should just show up as a note. Or if you can't really tell whether it's a communication, an audit, or a note, it should just show up in this list as a thing. It's activity, right? Don't try to label it as one of those three things. It's activity, and depending on, I mean, maybe this is kind of a contrived example, but this is the way the out of the box content is. Um, Based on the title, if there is one, based on the description, you'll probably be able to tell if it's a piece of audit trail or an external communication or an internal note. It should be obvious from context. Um, so that's kind of the way that I've implemented it in Cortex. So here, okay, so we're on system audits, but if we go over to the all tab, notice that nothing jumped around. That's because I'm not adding that extra mm, meta title, I guess. I'm not indicating that each one of these are system audits because it's kind of obvious from context that it's system audits. Um, and furthermore, if there were, uh, say, if there were an internal note, which is a journal note type, it would only show up in this list once because there's only really reason for a single record to show up once in this list. So, long story short, all journals show up on the All tab once and only once. They don't have any extra headers, so it's just the journal record with the configured title, description, and created and modified information. If it's one of those notes, go back here. One of uh, one of these notes types, it'll show up on the notes tab. If it's one of these system audit types, it will show up on the system audits tab. And if it's one of these external communications types, it will show up on the external communications tab. So if we go back here, external communications will show anything that is one of the external communications type. System audit, same thing. So what will end up happening in that example that I had over here is basically on the all tab, it'll show up just once. But because we can't tell if it's actually an internal note or an external communication or a system audit, it will still show up on all three tabs. So all that to say, it works the same way that Cherwell does in the ways that it's important for it to work the same way Cherwell does. But in the ways where it could probably work a little bit better, I took the liberty of making it work just a little bit better. Um, if I made an assumption that's maybe inaccurate, um, that's fine. I can fix it. Let me know down in the comments if you have a strong opinion one way or the other. If you think this is good, give it thumbs up. If you think this is bad and you think I should actually show it three times, if it shows up on all three tabs, let me know that as well, and I'll add it in for possibly this release 1.6 will be released um, sometime in the next couple weeks, probably. It probably won't be all the way at the end of October, but I am giving myself all the way until the end of October. That's the plan. Is sometime in October is when 1.6 will get released. Um, yeah, if you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. If you want to schedule some time with me, there's links to do that in the description. There's also a ton of other links in the video description, the demo site, um, the downloads releases site, a bunch of other stuff, documentation, all the information you could possibly want is down in the video description below. If you have thoughts, comments, leave them in the comments. And I'd love to see you at the Cortex users group again every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific. And I think that'll do it for today. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.